county is responsible to do this in perpetuity. But then in another part in that same paragraph, she said if we do not renew the lease, then the responsibility will shift to the towns, and it's going to cost the towns a lot of money to do all that.
I got the impression that they were just trying to browbeat us into submission to get their way.
But that makes it sound like if you say no, you can't have any of that money. I log for a living. They could call a company and clear cut 9 or 15 acres or whatever it is. We could do that in 2 weekends. They could have that long done before September, before their lease renews, and consume all that money for themselves, is what that makes that sound like.
Yep.
That would be tied up in the courts for a long,
Yeah.
long time.
They're not gonna go ahead.
Right? That's how I read it.
No.
Any such alterations without our approval.
Well, that isn't how the two town lawyers are reading the contract, so I'm not relying on them.
You gotta fight it.
This is not done, we're having,
Same one on the Cohocton.
Yeah. That's why I said that.
Okay.
so we have to have like some consensus of a proposal for the county to. with
They
the
were
towns
looking
of
for some
Prattsburg.
sort of a
Yeah.
response from the
Right.
towns.
Does Prattsburg have a solar law?
No, I don't believe they do at this point now. And I can't answer that 100%, but I don't think they do. They haven't ever said,
Well, what are you and Jan proposing?
we're not proposing anything. They wanted us to do a proposal of what we would accept from the, clear cutting of the woods. The Prattsburg will not agree to that at all. And we would have to say sort of what way we would lean about clear cutting, which would be really crazy when you have a 10-year plan and our lawyers are arguing that we own those and they can't do anything to that. So that's our position, that why would we go ahead and clear cut that if we can have a steady income for the town of, at a low end, even say $50,000 every 10 years. We own 5/8, Prattsburg owns 3/8 of the property, which,
Of the woods.
of the whole,
Okay, say that again. Cohocton owns what?
5/8 and Prattsburg owns 3/8 of the property. Even though it's all in Prattsburg, so I've never understood that. That's how it's split up.
Did we ever decide who had the woods?
No, I don't think it's split up that way. There's no map splitting it up. It's just, there's a big fenced-in area that was the old landfill, and behind that fence is 16 acres of wooded area.
Wouldn't the contract apply to only that area inside the fence?
That's the legal question that'll probably end up in court.
Until that's decided.
Well, you mean from the lease with the county?
The county has the right to do what they need inside the fence, the property that they've been working for X number of years, but not the balance of the land.
Well, see, the whole lease depends on the county's ability to operate that property as a landfill. That's the stated purpose in the lease. But the landfill has been closed and capped for years and years and years,
Yeah.
and is not allowed to be used as a landfill anymore. So that limits the county as to what it can do. It's allowed to operate a landfill on a piece of property that the DEC says they can't operate a landfill. And the county has agreed to that in the consent order.
Somebody needs to get a hold of the DEC then and figure out if they can cut the trees or not. Because it sounds like if they've got the right to cut the trees, they're gonna go cut the trees.
They don't have the right to cut the trees.
You state that,
I do say that.
but
That agreement.
but that agreement does, to me, sounds like they
It's
can
a
go do
very
whatever they
gray
wanna do.
area. It's a very gray area.
I don't
So if
think
we-
they
if they-
have, I don't think they have access to get to the property.
Oh,
From-
I bet they do. They
from
take
the
road,
road.
they'll put an access in
Oh,
there.
yeah.
It was never contemplated that the town, or that the county would have the right to just cut down trees. The county's right to cut down trees on that property is tied to the county's right to operate that property as a landfill. And it makes sense from the 1981 lease that that wording would be in there, because at the time, the county was allowed to operate a landfill there, and it was entirely possible at the time that the county would need to expand the landfill area, which means that the county might be required or find it advisable to cut down some trees.
Sounds like they're taking advantage of the current verbiage.
Could they,
I'm sorry?
well, could they
It sounds
say
like
that
they're
they're,
taking advantage of the current verbiage.
They're paying the insurance and they're
They're
paying for the
who's
testing
taking
and stuff,
advantage?
still
county.
as a landfill?
Yeah, the lease
Well, I
is
think that's
crap.
probably where they're coming from, but they're asserting an absolute right to
Right.
own that timber, and I don't think
Well, I
that's sustainable.
Before the board makes a decision, I don't think they have the right to do it. I don't have the right to farm somebody's property and cut their trees down. But if it's in a gray area, somebody needs to be figuring the gray area out, or they're gonna go cut trees down.
well, before they can do anything, they have to get permission from the DEC, and those of us who
They don't need permission from the they don't need permission from the DEC
Yeah,
to log a
they
piece
do.
of property.
It-
No, they don't, not
No,
on a piece of property.
excuse me, the landfill was put in the Superfund because it's so toxic.
Yeah.
That was put to rest, the Superfund, about 20 years ago. Then the lease has gone on with the county and they do the testing of the wells and the air quality. Nobody has run it. The DEC still is in charge of what goes on in that.
Well, then I'm
land.
saying that
The
the
DEC
DEC should give you the yay or nay on if they feel
Yeah.
the verbiage in that document says that they have the right to cut trees down. That's all I'm
And
No,
saying.
the
the DEC
DEC is
right
gonna
now is
rule on
strongly
whether
urging-
anything can be done.
Select cuts.
Well, then that's the decision. If
No,
the
it's not,
DEC
it doesn't have
says yes or
anything
no.
to do with them clear cutting, it has to do, if there's no solar project, they're not gonna clear cut the trees.
And they originally recapped that landfill because they were concerned about toxic runoff on the backside of the hill over in Ingleside contaminating water wells. So that's why the DEC, I believe, will be and should be concerned about putting a solar farm on it because of the potential damage to that new
Yeah.
camp.
But if we're talking about the solar farm, or is they cutting the trees? I thought we were talking about cutting trees.
No, that's a part of it, that whether the towns will allow them to do that and whether we can or can't.
Did they say how, the solar farm would damage the cap? How far down do they have to go? They say?
That's what's up in the air, and that's something
Because-
that it's a solar company that has not given any detailed plans to us or the county.
'Cause it states in the DEC the cap is 15 to 17 feet thick. So I doubt if they go down that far.
No, but they can't disturb the cap at all, is what DEC is saying, but that's,
So I wouldn't think you'd have to make any decision. If the DEC says they can't do it, they can't do it.
well, we don't have to make a decision until and the county is checking with the DEC and supposed to have that answer for us after their meeting, which is, I believe,
To your point, to make it extremely simple, if I lease a house from you, it doesn't give me a right to cut down a tree in the front yard.
And I agree. The way my farm leases are wrote, as I carry all fiscal responsibility to maintain that property for my farming use. There's nothing to do with cutting somebody's trees down, so.
But again, it would be a gray area for you if those trees continued,
Yes, we'll see
those
if the
trees
outcome of
continue to
Right.
shove
That-
your,
that's-
you know, your
but,
crop smaller
I
and smaller
mean,
and
the whole
smaller.
board is
Right.
to be
You know,
advised
like,
what's
you know,
going
to
on
maintain
enough?
or trim
and
it,
what
you know.
direction. we
It's just a
want.
gray area.
Pittsburgh is
$60,000,
basically,
$80,000 is a lot of money.
Yeah.
pro the solar, which is not a problem if the DEC permits it. The question is, they don't want those panels disturbed. Then the county said, well, the solar company would possibly do just the fenced in area. So it's really up to the DEC.
5 megawatts.
50-50.
It's a 5 megawatt.
Right, and it's
But even
18
after
feet,
that, you still are splitting
or 18 acres inside, so they, to do 5, they said they'd be at least 23, so they would have to go outside that fenced area.
Or they said they would be willing to scale the solar project down.
Okay.
So that, I mean, so we can't do anything or make a decision, but we have to think about how we're heading, is why it's brought up.
Let's move on.
Well, Hardy, solar law, you're thinking marginal lands, right?
Well, we are, but it's not, it
Gonna
won't be
affect
covered by
that,
our
yeah.
law because it's not in the town of Cohocton.
But
Oh,
We
it's
own it.
not.
Oh, we know that.
The land is in Prattsburg.
Land sits in Preston.
All of it,
so
all of it's in
Cohocton solar law
Prattsburg,
is
well
not
then
gonna
what do
address
we care
landfills.
about their woods?
But yeah, you know, there is encouragement for
Mhm.
brown fields and that sort of stuff. DEC has published draft guidelines for landfills on solar arrays, and they have very strict requirements for that. You know, as Judy said, there's varying degrees of landfills, and this one is more toxic than many of the normal landfills because of some of the chemicals that were put in there from gunlock. So I think ultimately DEC is gonna weigh in as to whether or not they can. The company that is proposing the solar won the RFP from Steuben County to do any of the landfills at $5,000 a megawatt, which is below the market value for solar farms because landfills are more expensive to build on because of all of the regulations around it. What's the land on the backside look like, Jan? Sloped? Flat, sloped, or the timbered area?
You'd have to see it. It's just on the north side. It goes downhill to between Ingleside and Naples. There's a seasonal access road there. And there's a little bit of slope behind it where the number 12 existing windmill is. And then over on my property, there's a drainage ditch that runs, diagonally through my property, and there's a spring that comes out and water runs down through there, and I don't wanna see that cap damaged, 'cause who knows what's gonna go into that spring. So, I don't think it's a good idea at all.
There's a wild herd of cattle using it.
Would that be a DEC concern?
Yeah.
Would DEC be involved in something like that?
DEC and the health department. They got 4 test wells, north, south, east, and west.
Moving along, 3 Main Street, Rick, and I think you say his name, Nogay, something like that, who owns the striped building and the little old White House just down the street here, is interested in selling that property. Chuck and I looked at it today with him, to say that it's 4,700 square feet, and to say that every inch of it is full of junk would not be an understatement. But it's not all junk. There's a lot of antiques and a whole bunch of things, but he will dispose of that. But he is willing to sell the building. Chuck and I talked about it. There is a garage part at the one end that has a cement floor, has one garage door. It's would be someplace to park the 2 police cars, certainly convenient to this building. Neither of the buildings, it's an old building. Chuck, it's gonna need some work. It's just a huge, huge warehouse kind of thing. There's a curb stop there, but there is no water or any kind of septic or any kind of plumbing. The little house next to it, the Way House, is totally bare inside. The, whatever you call it, the 2x4s are up, but there's no drywall, there's no anything. That building's in pretty good, solid shape. Chuck and I basically, when he approached me and I said we'd go look at it, I wanted Chuck to look at it, cause I didn't wanna be in the same situation with the bus garage where, somebody's saying, well, you'd have to do, $1 million worth of work to use the building. Chuck said if you wanted to, the garage would be usable, if you'd have to put in possibly another garage door. And, to use then the rest of the building as a mixed use, you would have to put up a firewall, which is not a big deal thing. The other thing is huge. It would have more storage than the town would ever need. Barry needs storage. We talked about it. I would not, for the 2 buildings, I have a price in my, I don't know if publicly I want it. No, Chuck talked to him afterwards. He stopped by to talk to Chuck about some other things. And mentioned a little bit lower than what I would be willing to pay, and he said, well, he'd have to think about that. And then Chuck said, well, would you think about this, and raised it a little bit more. And he said, yeah, he would think about it. But the question is that anything anybody here is interested in even pursuing or looking at? We're talking in the $30,000 to $40,000 range for the both buildings. And it would certainly be a possibility to move the ambulance into. There's like so much room there. The garage space is plenty big enough for 2 ambulances and 2 police cars. And then what you do with the rest is, the little house would not take much work to drywall, and you'd have to put plumbing in and that sort of thing. Not doable. That's just an idea, because we have to have some place for the police cars once the bus garage is sold.
But the bus garage said we could stay in there, right? Did they say that?
Not forever, he said for a temporary thing. Mark's actually gonna bring the police cars down here because for the summer, it'll be easier than going down there. But that's just food for thought. He's not listing it, he's talking to us about it right now.
I fought for this once a few years ago. And we just sold the bus garage, so.
No.
I don't think it's a good idea, especially talking moving your ambulances down to an area where 90% of your membership's on the other side of town. Doesn't even make sense, that part of it anyways. I mean, I get the police cars, but to even talk about disturbing where you're gonna put the ambulances right now, you don't have any membership on this side of the town. So you'd be increasing any response time by 5 minutes for anything. You get people to come all the way down here to get stuff.
Well, as you're well aware, there are some issues right now, and
Oh,
a
there is.
meeting going on right now, so we may not have, I'm hoping that's not an issue, but it could be.
I don't know. I haven't been made aware of any meetings or any issues, so it's privileged information, I guess.